Joshua Colp, Asterisk project lead, director of engineering. You can call me many things. I'll probably answer to any of them. So let's start with year in review when it comes to versions. So Asterisk 22 was released fairly recently in October. October is generally when we do the new major release every year. Just as a project, I've tried to make it so that we're extremely predictable in our releases. So generally every 6 weeks or so, we'll do minor releases, and once a year in October, we do the major releases. So we had Asterisk 22, that's had 3 releases so far. We're at 22.2.0. Asterisk 21 is at 10 releases, latest being 21.7.0. Asterisk 20, that's had 10 releases, so 20.12.0. And Asterisk 18, 10 releases, oh, in the past year. Yes, 10 releases in the past year. So the latest version of Asterisk 18 is 18.26.1. 18 is now security fix only. It will go end of life on October 20th of this year. If you are on Asterisk 20, I do urge you to look at updating to one of the more recent long-term supported releases. Best option being Asterisk 22. That'll make it so you don't have to think about it for quite a bit longer. And then overall, there was over 2,000 commits across all branches and about 1.5 million downloads. I am seeing that trickle up more than usual, just because I think of AI is pushing that. There's just tons of people looking at doing conversational voice AI and using Asterisk as the platform for doing that. Just today, as I was sitting over there responding to forum stuff, there was 2 more posts about integrating AI into Asterisk in some capacity. It's a very hot topic right now, which I will actually give some insight into roadmap stuff on that as well. From a forum community interaction perspective, as always, our community forums are at community.asterisk.org. It's a great resource if you're having issues, troubles, or you want to help others. Please do check it out. But over the past year, we had 8,800 new posts. We had over 600 new contributors. And in comparison to previous year, that's about a 10% increase overall. So still growing there as well. As I said, Asterisk 22 is now available. It is a long-term supported release, so we'll see bug fixes for 4 years and then an additional year of security fixes. It's had 300 commits or so and 54 individual contributors. Top contributors overall by number of commits. George Joseph, the other member of the Asterisk development team who wasn't able to be present, is number 1. Naveen Albert is number 2. Sean Bright, who's a long-time Asterisk contributor, was number 3. Mike over there was number 4. Ben was number 5, and so on. And because I've become a director and a manager, I'm way down there, because that's the way it goes. I say this every year, and I'm slightly curious. How many people know the difference in Asterisk between a standard release and an LTS release before reading what's in front of you? We got 1 person, 2, 3, 4, 5. So yeah, standard releases generally are for if we're doing major changes that we want to give a little bit more time to flesh out. They receive 1 year of bug fixes and 1 additional year of security fixes. An example of this is Asterisk 21. Long-term supported releases, 4 years of bug fixes, 1 year additional for security-only fixes. That would be Asterisk 20 and 22. And these alternate very predictably. Now the good stuff. Asterisk the past year, what's new? I'm going to cover some stir shaken stuff, PJ SIP, community-driven improvements, free PBX and PBExact-driven improvements, AI, AAA, documentation, which may catch people off guard there, because I don't often talk about documentation, but good stuff there. And then some miscellaneous fun, which was a favorite of a past lead, Matt Fredrickson. So I've kept that going on his behalf as well. Stir shaken. How many people have to deal with stir shaken? We got a few. So the stir shaken implementation in Asterisk was really one of the first ones that existed, and stir shaken over time has evolved and become more flushed out in some areas, and other areas continue to be a bit of a not well defined. So we participated in an event called Open SIPIT, which was, or kind of is, I don't know if it's going to happen anytime soon again, but a spiritual successor to SIPIT, which was a long-term or long ongoing testing event where different vendors would get together and test their SIP implementations. Because SIP as well is very loosey-goosey in some areas in the spec. Side note, slight tangent. The words may and should never appear in a specification, because that never ends well when it comes to defining behavior. So we ran into difficulty with signing of the JSON Web Token payload. We had our own implementation. We decided to utilize a well-known library to do that, libjwt, and that worked out great. However, the con is that does mean that for stir shake and support in Asterisk, that is now a dependency. It is not a hard dependency. If you're not doing stir shaken, you don't really have to care or think about it. As well, we had to redo our configuration to better fit the actual way that stir shaken is being done these days. There's tons of documentation about this on the documentation site. Read it, preferably multiple times. We're also a good resource as a central place to know all the specifications that you should know for stir shaken too. From a testing perspective, we like testing. It makes our lives easier because then we can catch issues and verify changes. We added substantially more test coverage for stir shaken, as well as actually receiving real-world testing. Our stir shaken implementation is actually being used in the real world by people, which is great. It's still not perfect because, like I said, the specification leaves some things out of the specification. Sometimes it conflicts between standards, which is even better. So yeah, the issues we're seeing have shown that really sometimes it just doesn't align even across the world. One country wants it one way, another country wants it another. Even for the SIP side of things, sometimes they want non-standard stuff that's just not anywhere in the spec. So that will continue to evolve as things go on, and we'll continue to update, fix issues, and go from there. From a usage perspective, if you're familiar at all with stir shaken, if signing is configured, we will throw an identity header with a signature on the outgoing invite. If verification is configured, the identity header will be examined, verified, and the results made available in the dial plan. You can then decide what you want to do with it from there. Full documentation is on the documentation site, docs.asterisk.org. Search for stir shaken. It'll be there. As well, I did a previous webinar for stir shaken, so you can find that online on YouTube as well for Sangoma. Woo! As always, courtesy of Chris over there. I am not that adept at Google Slides, nor honestly do I want to be. So if you need to deploy stir shaken directly in Asterisk, give it a whirl. We'd like to hear if it's working, if it's not working. If it's not, file an issue. PJSIP. PJSIP is a fundamental aspect of Asterisk, so we always spend time on keeping it up to date, making it better, all that kind of stuff. So we had some quality of life things, one of the things I will get to here soon. We updated PJSIP to the latest version, so we always try to keep up to date as we can. We ran into some issues, but Ben helped overcome them. T38 support now supports IPv6 for people who still live in a world of fax. Personally, I'm convinced fax will never die, which makes me sad. Endpoint identification now supports by request URI or transport address. As well, there's now a dial plan function that you can use for parsing URIs from headers. I know out there in dial plan, a lot of people like to use just general string stuff to do URI parsing. There's actual functions for doing that. I highly suggest using them. They make it a lot easier and always do it correctly. So here's something that's really useful that came out of stir shaken. Traditionally, Asterisk was built in the world of ISDN. The core is very ISDN driven. If you're hanging up a call, that cause code is an ISDN cause code. We have to map it into the SIP world. That operation is lossy. It's not one-to-one. When it came to the stir shaken support, we needed the ability for users to be able to specify precisely the SIP response to give. So we've now made available an AMI action and dial plan application called PJSIP Hangup. You can use that instead of Hangup. You give it a SIP response code, that's what it'll send. You don't need to do any finagling of ISDN cause codes or any of that. Great for testing as well. Alex Balashoff yesterday mentioned in his test he was using Hangup, and there was a comment about how it maps into SIP. You can just use PJSIP Hangup and specify that precise SIP response code. Community. How many people know what community is and not a group of people, but the product from Sangoma? Nope. So Community is a product from Sangoma from a company called Functionalities that we acquired, I don't know at this point, 2 or 3 years ago probably? It is a multi-tenant UCaaS platform built on Asterisk. It runs on Kubernetes. It scales up and down depending on load, all that fancy stuff. They use a fork of Asterisk with extremely specific changes for the platform. What we are doing is constantly working to basically get more of the special stuff out of Community and into open source. From a maintenance perspective, it's just generally easier. So we've included a few more things into open source that came from Community. So SIP Notify is something that Mike over there worked on. There is now a PJSIP Notify dial plan application that has been added that allows you to send SIP Notify requests from the dial plan. You can use a pre-configured Notify message, or you can dynamically do it in the dial plan. It doesn't have to be predefined. There's also a CLI command for sending a PJSIP Notify within dialogue on a channel. And really, this was driven by certain phones that allow you to use Notify messages to control them. A good example, I believe, is Polycom. You can send a Polycom a Notify message to say, hey, I want you to put this call on hold. So it's not Asterisk itself putting the call on hold, it's the phone doing it instead. Another one is voicemail. Community uses app voicemail and ODBC. Storing voicemail recordings in a database in a large system can be extremely problematic. It makes replication more difficult. So what we did is added support for separately storing voicemail messages on the disk, which has better replication strategies, while keeping all of the metadata about voicemails in the database. So this allows them to have essentially smaller tables for voice or for the database server, and it just makes life easier. So if you're a user of app voicemail and ODBC, and you're scaling up more and more like Community does, then give this a try as well. Another thing, like I said, Community is multi-tenant, but they need to know what each call, which tenant it's for. Previously, they had a patch to Asterisk to add it to tons of places across the tree. So we redid this, simplified the actual change itself, and made it available publicly. Ben over there did the actual change for that, so you can apply a tenant identifier to channels, and they will show up in the various events in other places, like CDR and such. Free PBX and PBExact users, we also take all of the issues from there into account and help that project out as well. Hopefully you all know what free PBX is. Just a general thing. This goes a little bit nitty-gritty. I'll stick to source of truth generally stored in database. It's a GUI. It writes out Asterisk configuration files, but it also has some database stuff and uses AGIs, and also uses AMI. And it just exercises a lot of different parts of Asterisk, which is a good thing because it allows us to identify areas that may be problematic from a performance perspective. Manager being one of them. Manager can generate a lot of events, particularly on heavily loaded systems. In reality, everything has a cost. All of those events incur a cost. So the more of them you have, it's more costly. Even filtering itself has a cost. Manager had filtering built in, but at a certain point it became inefficient and just continued to eat up CPU essentially in order to do the filtering, which was supposed to help it. So we improved this functionality to be much more intelligent and efficient on filtering, which inevitably improved performance on heavily loaded instances. So if you are a user of AMI, I highly suggest giving this a look and tweaking your filtering so that if it's heavy enough, then your CPU usage will be decreased. Another one is mixed monitor stereo support, which I believe Mike did. So mixed monitor traditionally mixes both sides of the conversation. Oh, Ben did it. Ah, there we go. Ben did it, not Mike. It traditionally mixes both sides of a conversation into a single mono stream. For normal listening, this is good. This is generally fine enough. Some people still want stereo audio. For AI, this becomes problematic, particularly if you're doing post-processing for transcription, because the AI has to do a process known as diarization in order to identify the actual speakers. If you instead use a stereo file where each channel is a side of the conversation, that process doesn't have to occur. You know who is who. So we added an option to Mix Monitor to instead allow you to store each direction as a channel in the recording instead. This was, in the past, also a feature request from a lot of people on the forums, so if that is one of you, give it a whirl. And now AI. We previously, or I did, talked about AI in Asterisk last year and potentially the year before. External media in ARI has proven to be a great resource for doing AI work in Asterisk. It's been great for us. Other people are doing it, I know, because they ask questions on the forums. But because we did external media so long ago, to this point, we've had to do no changes to Asterisk to facilitate any of this work. It's just worked great. Like I say there, you can use other methods like audio socket or using a full SIP client if you are brave enough. I would not recommend the full SIP client perspective. But this is the one we've chosen as a company. It's one we invest in, and it's one that works. However, that being said, we will work to improve things nonetheless. And that will come up during the roadmap part of this. Now, documentation. A complaint that has come up in the past is that when we changed policy on feature inclusion, such that features can go into existing branches, there was no information readily or easily accessible about when that went in. Something that occurred is people would go to our documentation, they would see something, but they would be on an old version of Asterisk and actually wouldn't have it. But they wouldn't really know why until they started digging. So what we've done is George Joseph and Sean Bright essentially wrote scripts that went back into the past and filled out version information for dial plan applications, dial plan functions, some configuration stuff of when that was introduced into Asterisk. That has also made it into the documentation site at docs.asterisk.org, as well as the command line interface. So you can actually see on there now, it says since, and it will give you the versions where something was introduced. Yes, that's a nice improvement. It will save me time, honestly, of having to identify when stuff was added for people. So let's do some miscellaneous fun. AppQ now has a configurable start time for periodic announcements. Fixed a delay in handling commands for channels in an ARI application. That was a fun one that Mike, I think we took a few stabs at. For context, there were certain cases in ARI where you would tell, you would say, do something on a channel, and it would take up to 100 milliseconds before it actually did it. And that was because it was just waiting up to 100 milliseconds before it actually continued in the queue of stuff. But now that's instant, which is good. Custom directories can now be searched for sounds. ARI now has a tone detected event if you're using the tone detect dial plan function. For those who use ARI or may be planning to, just a heads up, the set variable functionality in it, you can use dial plan functions there. The same also applies for setvar in PJSIP or in AMI if you're doing an originate. Generally, anywhere you can specify a variable, you can use a dial plan function. ARI now provides diversion target in the hang-up event. Voicemail now has an option to prevent marking messages as urgent if you don't want anything to be urgent. Outgoing WebSockets now verify server certificate host name. ResRTP Asterisk now supports OpenSSL version 3 and up. And this was a dumpster fire that Mike did. ResRTP Asterisk supports multi-rate DTMF. Multi-rate DTMF is a fun thing. So we're going on a tangent now. In the specification for DTMF, you're supposed to have RFC 2833 or 4733 at the same rate as the audio codec. Meaning, if you're using Opus at 48 kilohertz, your DTMF should be at 48 kilohertz as well and not 8,000. In practice, for the most part, no one is doing that. There are a few physical devices that have started doing it. So yeah, we now support it because we had a commercial customer that was actually hitting this with actual equipment. But there are still finer details that we just kind of guessed based on how we think it should work because it wasn't defined enough. This may become more of a problem over time as Opus grows. We'll see. So just a heads up there, that may come up for you guys eventually. Dial has a new optional timeout for between dialing and ringing/progress, also known as post-dial delay. So you can specify a timeout on that if you get nothing back from an upstream. ResODBC now has improved performance when multiple concurrent connections are allowed. Manager has a new CLI command to kick connections if you have some dead AMI connections from outside stuff. And Originate AMI action now has a pre-GoSub option to allow executing a GoSub before dialing, just like you can in Dial. Hey. So some roadmappy upcoming stuff in Asterisk. This is very ARI heavy because we've taken the lessons and annoyances that we've found when it comes to doing our conversational voice AI stuff. We've looked at that and seen how we can improve ARI. So ARI requests and responses over WebSocket. So right now you establish a WebSocket connection from an ARI application into Asterisk. Events flow over that. Anything you want to do, like answer a channel, hang up, that's a separate HTTP request. So in a cloud environment, this can just be extra unnecessary work. So what we're doing is adding support for doing this over the WebSocket instead, which when combined with the next feature makes it much more easy to write scalable ARI applications. We're going to add outgoing connections from Asterisk to ARI applications. This feature will allow Asterisk to be the one to establish the connection to the app, to establish the WebSocket connection to the application. This can be on a per channel basis or one connection that handles all the channels. And when you combine this together with the previous one, it means you can essentially stick your ARI application behind a WebSocket-aware load balancer, which can give you failover and scaling. Then Asterisk only needs to know the address of your load balancer. It also means if you combine it with serverless, then stuff can just scale up and down even more easy. So that's the goal of those together. Another one is ARI external media over WebSocket. Right now, ARI generally uses RTP for external media. You can use audio socket. RTP is good for VoIP. VoIP world generally knows it, but it's annoying for application developers to use, having to strip away the RTP header, having to add an RTP header, a timestamp, a sequence number, all of that. So what we'll be doing is doing a change to allow bidirectional media over a WebSocket instead, without a header. It'll just be going back and forth. So no need to do an RTP header, no need to strip it, no need to use UDP. You just use WebSocket, and that is that. Some general reminders. As I said at the beginning, Asterisk 18 is now security fix only. As always, keep track of what's happening in newer non-LTS major releases of Asterisk. If you don't, you can potentially experience big surprises when you move forward. I do try to minimize big surprises as much as I can. We add upgrade notes, user notes, all that stuff. And then ChanSIP left us in 21. So we are moving further and further towards there being no release that includes ChanSIP. As well, keep apprised of the Asterisk versions wiki page. Dates and everything are on there, so you can plan accordingly. As soon as we release a major version, the dates are set in stone generally, so you know exactly when stuff is going to happen. Also keep apprised of the module deprecation wiki page. We list modules that are going to be deprecated, as well as when they'll be deprecated, that kind of stuff. Right now, there is nothing actively on the list to be deprecated. MeetMe was technically on the list previously, but has been paused for Vici Dial. But MeetMe may eventually disappear. And with that, as always, questions. Let's make Chris do something.
Who's got some questions for Josh? Quick, here we are. Go, couple.
Are the changes, you mentioned that in community they moved to storing disks or voicemails on disk. Is that going to eventually go to Asterisk?
It's in there now.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yep.
All right, good, thanks.
Anything I mentioned here, except for roadmappy stuff, is in open source.
Great. Good question. Yuri?
Josh, you spoke about removing RTP header from audio, which is what is good. Well, how about lost packets and some? So you have no metadata there. So how do you manage this? Or
are you referring to the WebSocket side?
yeah.
There won't be. There won't be any way of handling it. Whatever is receiving it will have to accept that there was lost audio.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Good question. Next back here.
Hi there, me again. So I noticed you made some really good changes to the documentation. I was curious. One day I was doing some support for a customer that was using a obviously deprecated version of Asterisk, and I noticed that the documentation for older versions such as 13 are just gone. Is that because you didn't want to have to refactor them and adjust them based on what you recently did to the newer ones?
Nitty-gritty stuff. So essentially we have to, in order to get the documentation into a state where we can publish it on the doc site, you have to actually build Asterisk and run it. And that has to become an asset that the documentation site pulls from the CI pipeline. So in order to go back into history, we'd either have to make that happen, or we would have to potentially commit all of the past XML files to the documentation repo.
I can see why you didn't do that now.
Yes.
Okay. And one more question is, what version is libjwt used on going forward, and is it backwards compatible, or is that already on the wiki?
I would suggest going to, it should be on the wiki. You can also go to the configuration file page for Stir Shaken on the documentation site. And it'll match that because the configuration will have changed and it would have been in the same commit.
Gotcha. And then last question, I promise. I noticed you got rid of SIP in 21. Does that mean that does that mean that Matt Florell of Vichidel finally decided to support PJ SIP?
I haven't gotten an email or a comment or anything about it, so
Okay. Well, he tends to run a little far behind in versions, so I guess that makes sense. All right. Thank you.
Great questions. Is there anyone over here with a question or two? Maybe? Okay. All right. Well, here we are.
Hi again. Quick and easy question. For SIP versus PJ SIP, I notice I have some gateways. They work fine with CHAN SIP. If I move them over to PJ SIP using the same ports, they don't work, and I've never been able to figure out why. Any thoughts on that?
So one issue that people run into is they use an identify section and only specify an IP address, so that the incoming traffic can't be individually identified. This commonly occurs on, or I've seen it most on, a specific combination FXO and FXX gateway. And essentially, the traffic comes in and gets treated as the FXS when it's actually the FXO. So you have to confirm that the identify sections specify the port as well, and that should resolve the issue. If not, community.asterisk.org. I will probably answer.
Thank you.
That was a great plug for the community forums there. So lots of great discussion. Josh has definitely answered a lot of questions there on a daily basis. Anyone else with questions in real life here at the moment? All right. Seeing none, thank you, Josh.
I'll also throw out thank you everyone for coming to AstriCon. This AstriCon 2025 has come to an end. A reminder, these presentations will be on YouTube, so if your pictures of the slides didn't come out quite well, look forward to that. And then otherwise, I will see you next year. Thanks, everyone.